Yeah. You have to enable screen sharing for me.
I will do that.
I guess I'll definitely need that and a bit later.
Hello, everyone who's joined us so far. Just giving a few minutes for everyone to come in.
Just see that this time my name is shown right.
Oh, good.
But even I've entered a different one previously, so wonder where it comes from.
Lots of settings in here.
Three, two, one. Go, Catherine.
Okay, let me just make sure you guys see what we want you to see here. All right, welcome to the conclusion of our three-part data webinar series. My name is Catherine, and I'm joined here by Thomas, who is our data integration expert. If you've joined this data webinar series since the beginning, that's great. Thank you for being with us. If not, we're happy you're here for this one. So please take advantage of the live atmosphere and ask us questions in the chat. We'll do our very best to answer your questions. It's always much more engaging if you ask us questions. So with that, during this final webinar, Thomas is going to walk us through how to integrate data into your singular graphic overlays using the composition script. So we're going to cover an intro and overview to composition scripting, using fetch to read data from an API, using singular data streams, which is a feature designed for high frequency and low latency data, and then using the Google Sheet widget messages in the composition script so that you can distribute the data from one Google Sheet widget across many of your different graphics in your composition. So with that, I think we're ready for Thomas to get the ball rolling.
Okay, let me share my screen and move this to the side. So let's do a quick recap, just a few slides of what we've done previously. And when you build compositions with Singular, then the basic building blocks are widgets, control nodes to connect the data to widget properties. You may have used data nodes and composition scripting before, and all of those four components, they have APIs or can reach out to APIs. In the first two webinars, we focused on the REST API and updating control nodes. On this one, we focus on composition scripting and how composition script can access and update control nodes, how we access and update widget nodes, and also from the composition script, we reach out to a third-party API and use the singular data stream API to connect to a data source. So when you load composition into an app instance and a composition that has composition scripts, the composition script is active in every output. So when you use Studio, then the composition script is active in the preview window and in the output window. And of course, in any instance, in every instance of the output URL, which you do. So this allows you to connect to particular properties of the system or of the output URL where it's running. You can define interactivity with the composition script on one hand. On the other hand, when you reach out to a data source, it adds one call per output instance that you open to your data backend. So composition scripts, how is it built and how do you actually use it? So composition scripts can be added to each subcompositions that you define. And from there, they access the widget properties. You also can add a root composition script at the root level. Then there is a global composition script, which you can use, and an overlay script, which is very specific. This one is just required when you want to integrate with a video player, for example, or with another app and exchange some data. We focus here on the global composition script, on the root composition script, and on the subcomposition scripts, and establish connections between all of them. Okay, so now let me move that aside. For this webinar, we've built a composition which we'll share with you. And this composition is a very simple one at the beginning, and we'll use various revisions with that, so we can easily navigate between all this, the states and the steps that we are following now. The composition has two subcompositions. There is one subcomposition which is the site panel. It has two control nodes, so you can modify that, and then the title and the site panel content, of course, updates. And we have
really
another
quick, Thomas. Can you guys see that his interface well, or are you able to zoom in just a touch in your browser?
Does this look better?
If you could do one more, I think that might be even better. But yeah, let's see how that plays
okay,
out.
so that's really big. Let's see how we.
Okay. Yeah, let's
so I need to move this a little bit up. There we go. The lower composition, it has well, one text. It's the lower text, and it's connected to this control node, and when you change it, you'll see it updated. Okay, so that's enough about this basic composition. Now let's have a look how to step into the composition script editor. You'll see two buttons up there. The first one opens the composition script editor and activates and actually runs and executes the JavaScript code which we should write. The second one opens the composition script editor in a safe mode, which means when you have a bug or an infinite loop that may block your entire browser, you can kill the browser and then come back to the composition script editor using the safe mode, fix your bugs, and continue with editing again. So there we go. Let me open it. The composition script editor opens in a separate browser tab. So, and there you can, in the drop down, you select which composition scripts you actually want to add. So I have the global one, the root composition, and the lower script. And I'll just add some examples from the boilerplate.
Can you do that just a touch slower, just in case everyone missed where you grabbed that boilerplate?
Okay, yeah,
so it's right up there.
From the library item there.
Okay,
and
yeah.
What I'll do is I'll just switch to the light theme, so this may look a bit better on the webinar. So the global script, well, as the name already says, it's there to define global function that you might need throughout the entire composition. And we have the root composition script and the lower composition script, which is a subcomposition. You'll notice they are both the same. That's because the root composition and subcompositions are basically almost the same. The only difference is that the root composition doesn't have a parent. So there's a lot of comments are there, we will look at them one by one. So an important tool when you do some web development, also when you work with a Singular composition script, is the Chrome debugger. And the Chrome debugger, well, gives you access to all your scripts. Let me close that. There we go. In case you have none of the files open, you always can use Control-P, and then by writing the name of your subcomposition, in this case it's the root, you can open the root composition script in your debugger. And the nice thing there is you can add just breakpoints and have a look at the variables. So to trigger that, I'll just save it. Let me make this a little bit smaller and have the windows side by side. So now we added the breakpoint well here. So the first call already had been executed. And this is where it says initialize composition script root. Well, that's one interesting thing I want to point out. When you look at that order, the first script that gets initialized is the global script. Then the second one is the lower third script. And then at the very end, it's the root script. So the initialization goes from the lowest child up to the parent, which ensures that when the root script is initialized, all the parent scripts already exist and you can talk to them.
Really quick, Thomas, we have a question from Ross here about if the composition script is loaded before any widgets, etc. No, the widgets are loaded and initialized before the composition scripts are getting loaded. So from your composition script, you can access all the widgets that are within that subcomposition. And that's just important to understand. Whenever the subcomposition script is initialized, all the elements within that subcompositions are already there. So they need to be loaded first so that the script knows what to speak to,
yeah,
essentially.
And the Singular render engine takes care of that.
Okay.
So
really quick, can you also show us how to open that Chrome debugger? I think most people joining this specific webinar might know that already, but
the Chrome debugger, it's easy. You click F12 on your keyboard, or just open. Well, I'm working on a German version. Go to the development tools and you select the development tools button down there.
Okay. Cool.
F12, I think it's a well-known button when you do web development. Okay, so now let's jump back to our Chrome debugger. There are two functions by default in this library templates. One is the init function, and the other one is the close function. The close function is not absolutely necessary, but you use it to clean up well, memory, timers, or close data streams. And the init function, that is a must. And the init function, it gives us access to two objects. One is the composition object, and the composition object contains a lot of methods, like well, it can add listeners, access children within that subcomposition, find subcompositions, find group widgets, get access to the DOM element if you want to do some very specific animation effects, get payloads. There are two functions. I'll get back to that in a moment. You can, of course, also set the payload or use jump to and play to control the animation. So let's first have a look at the let's have a look at the children. What do we get there? With the children, and we are at the root level, just keep that in mind. The root composition has two children. One is the side bundle and the other one is the lower third. Okay, great. So let's find one of them. Let's go for the lower third. So just use the name. You also can get a subcomposition by its ID, but we usually use the name, and which makes the code more human readable. So what this function returns is an array, because names are not necessarily unique. But when you use composition scripting, well, we recommend you to use unique names. So you always can just take the first element in the array, and this gives you then access to the subcomposition. So when we look there, there are some more methods available, like all those get methods. Well, some may sound familiar, like get size X and Y and rotate and position. So using that, you can set properties from the transformation editor. And like contrast, zoom, grayscale, hue, or visibility gives you access to the properties within the effects editor. So, and with set, you can set those values. With get, you can get these values. So what we're looking at now is this get payload and get payload to. What do this actually do? So let's have a get payload. Oops, we don't need that. And we have a get payload 2. And let's have a look at the difference. Get payload gets the payload of the lower third composition and returns an array of a key value pair. So that's the name of the control node, and that's the value of the control node. Well, it's the same in our example. Get payload 2 returns a JSON object. That's what I mostly use because it's easier, pretty easy to be handled in JavaScript. So let's go back again and have a look what other functions we have there. There is one that's called find widget. Now it gets interesting because what we want to find is this lower text widget, which we see here. And so we'll use that. That name find widget, and what we'll use here, it's the lower text. There we go. And again, this function returns an array because you could have multiple of those widgets. And we'll just take the first one, and with that, we'll get access to all the properties of this widget in particular. So, and again, this widget has transformation and effect properties. So now let's just have a look at the payload of that widget, because this returns something a little bit different. This get payload function on the widget returns widget specific properties. So that's different for a rectangle widget, for the gradient, for the image widget, for the circle widget. And it's a lot here what you can set with the text widget. And there's the text that we have here. So we can use, for example, the set text and set the text property and just say ABC. There we go. And of course, it's a JP.
We like errors live, so you can show how to troubleshoot. This is good.
It's just a simple typo. So now I've corrected it because this has to be a JSON. Similar to that, you can set multiple properties at the same time. I'll just set the text property, and well, when I get it, the properties again, then we'll see the text property updated.
Cool.
Okay. One thing to keep in mind when you are a bit unsecure what the value of some properties that you want to set is, you always can just use the, for example, let's have a look at the get visibility. visibility. I hope I wrote it right. Oh, there is another typo. And this returns a Boolean value. So that means that the set function also requires a Boolean value, and with false, I can hide it, and that's the widget which I'm hiding now. And with true, I can activate it. Okay, so that was the first 5 miles of the marathon. Let's jump back. Let's remove this breakpoint and jump back into the composition script editor. I think we have seen most of it. No, actually, there is one thing, one more which I'd like to show you. So I need to move this a little bit aside. Let me take this one, that's easier. We have a lot of functions in the boilerplates. So there is, for example, a message listener. This message listener is, well, gets called when either you use interactive elements within your composition. So every click or hover or enter or mouse leave is going to call that listener, or also when you have a widget that sends custom messages. And there are a few of them. The timer widget, for example, sends custom messages, and also the Google Sheet widget is sending custom messages. So we're going to use that. I'm moving that just to the very end. So I want to clean up this a little bit. So we don't need that many code in here. Then there's the state changed listener. It's the state changed listener. It's fired whenever the animation state of a subcomposition changes, and it tells you then when the state is reached. That's the out state. That's the in state. We don't use that here in our example, so we're going to remove that. The payload changed listener is definitely something what we're going to use, so we keep this one. And the data node payload changed listener, that's fired when you have a data node connected to your composition. Use that, and the incoming data are changing. We don't use that here. Also delete these comments. Good. So now we're almost ready to go. When you have a data source and you send commands and data to Singular, you can address this data to the subcompositions directly by sending a payload and addressing it to a subcomposition. This works fine in many cases, but sometimes you have a lot of data, and your data service might not be that flexible that you can adapt the payloads and split up data into various packages. So in such cases, what you do is you'll create a big JSON and send it to a single composition to a single control node in your composition. And that's what this JSON data control node shows here within our root composition. And what I want to do is, whenever this JSON data control node changes, I want this lower text being displayed in the lower, the site title up here, and the site text down there. So how to do that? Well, the benefit, of course, is your data service just needs to send a single call to Singular, and then you can deploy it distribute the data with some composition script in your composition. Another benefit is you may use the same data in various compositions, but the structure of composition is different. So you just create one control node with the same name, and then receive the JSON. And the only thing you need to update then is the composition script within that composition, and your data service, it stays the same. It doesn't need a modification.
So you don't need to pre-format anything with your data service. All that's done in
right.
the composition script. Right?
You just get a big JSON, send it to the composition, and do the rest in the composition. Okay, so now let's roll.
Should we say briefly too? I mean, most people might know this already, but anything that you're doing in the composition script is not going to be rendered in Composer itself. So if you jump back to Composer, it's just not going to be previewed in there. That's the nature of this. So anything that you create in here, anything you write in here will be displayed in your actual output.
Yeah, we decided to separate the composition scripts from the Composer. The composition scripts are not executed in the Composer because you can have logic in the composition script that sub-compositions animate off on a specific value, but that's some composition then that the designer is working on. So this would be a bit confusing. So that's why we decided if you want to test the composition script, test it on the output, or test it within the composition script editor.
Yeah, right
okay.
Here.
There we go. So what we want is the composition object for the lower third. What we'll do there is I'll go to the comp object and find the lower third subcomposition and take the first element that's found, that's there. I only have one, so this is good. Great. So then the next thing what I'm going to do is within the payload change, because that's where we get the information when we receive new data. So I'll grab the payload from comp, and I'll use the get payload to command because I want it in JSON format. So what do we actually get then? Then we'll get this format where we have the JSON data and then the stringified content of this field. So what do we do there? We say constant, and we want to have the JSON data, and we have to just JSON parse the payload, and then we take the JSON data there. So now this gives us the JSON object of whatever we have there. So in the next step, what I'd like to show you is how you can extend the composition object with some custom functions. So let's define this custom function for this composition lower, and I'll call that just update content. And what I'll send there is exactly the text which I want to display in this lower text, and that's then my JSON data, and it's the lower text. There we go. So, and I frequently use this button because that beautifies your code, so it always looks nice. There we go. So now we have defined this. When I now change something there, what we'll get is an error. So because this lower third update content function does not exist, so we have to define that. So I'll just copy this and remove all those elements which I don't actually need.
And you're in the lower third script right now.
In the lower. And then I'll define the update content function, and it receives text. And now what are we going to do with that? So what we want to do is we will directly update the widget. So let's do that. So we'll get the widget. I think we call it lower text. That's the composition. We find the widget, and the widget is lower text, and there we go. We'll take the first one. So, and we remember that the widget has a set payload function, which takes the text property, and what we'll do is we'll set the text variable which is sent to this function. And if we've done everything right, then we should see the text now updating. Yeah, there we go. So now this function, the listener at the root reads the JSON, calls the update content function, sends the lower JSON text to the lower third, and the lower third composition script writes directly the text into the widget itself. Great. Let me show you one more thing, because when we remember, what we've done here is the lower third is linked to this control node, and this control node updates the text too. Let's try that now here. When I now change the control node, it doesn't update anymore. Why is that? Okay, so let's have a look at the console log. So now when I change the text, I'll see a callback here, and it says that the payload at the root level changed. That's interesting, and it's right. We've defined a payload change listener at the root level, so that's just a refresh issue. When I refresh the browser window, then this should go. So what happens is when I update this lower text, the listener at the root level is called. That's because all callbacks are propagated to the parent composition until it receives, it finds a stop propagation. So what we can do there is just copy and paste that. And oops, this was a little bit too much. Let me see. Let me make this a little bit bigger. There we go, because I've defined that now twice. And I only want to have this one here. There we go. So what we do now is I don't want this console log, but I want to have the payload listener changed in the lower third. Now this one is called propagation is stopped, and I have the option again. Should have actually the option again. I need to save it. That's actually an interesting one. When you see the check marks here, this means that these composition scripts are saved. If there is no check mark as here, they are not saved and also not active. So I just need to save it. And now when I update it and change the control node, you'll see how the text updates. And when I change it at the root level, then the root composition is triggering the function. This is dangerous, and you never should do that. You just should either link control nodes to widget properties, or control them from your composition script. So this is you get competing access then to this. Okay. So now let's have a quick look what to do with the site bundle. Actually, I'm not going to type that. What I'll use is a load a revision which I've prepared. Which is this
and again,
one.
There's going to be a composition for everybody in the template library with all of the work that Thomas will have completed in this webinar. So you'll see all of this in the composition script.
Okay, so now let's jump into that, into the composition script. So this composition script, so we extended that a little bit. I activate that. And the root composition now has a composition side panel object, and we've added the update content function for the side panel. And what we submit there is a JSON that matches exactly the payload JSON that the side panel requires. And at the side panel composition script, what we'll do there is we have a function, and it receives the JSON payload, and we'll use the composition set payload function to update it. So now let's change that text, and there we go. Okay, there is one more thing I'd like to show you here is I've also added in this revision global functions. And the global functions are defined in the global script. And there are functions to get widgets, to get sub-compositions. So, and this automatically then just returns the first element in the array that's found. And those functions, they are exposed to the global context down here. And when we look at the global context, just add another breakpoint here. When we look at the context object there, so we'll see in the global and the globals the functions that we've added, and in the utilities functions that are managed by Singular. There is one that takes care of and manages data streams. There is the moment, create the moment, which is used for the timer, for example, and some other utilities. So this was the first part as an introduction. Let's have a look at the next step. Next step, what we want to do is we want to use the composition script and reach out to an API and retrieve data. There are various options. You can use the XML HTTP request, or what I'll use here is the fetch function. Both works. Composition script support a standard JavaScript function, so you can use any of them. So now the question is, what APIs do we use? And I found an API, which is the random data API, that creates random data for example, addresses, apps, bank, beer, blood, well, cannabis, coffee. That's one of my favorites, and of course, vehicles. And decided to use this endpoint, the vehicles endpoint. And whenever you send a request, this API returns random data. So it's really nice for testing data. So take this, and what we'll do is we'll add this function to the roots. So we have a const, and we save that in the const. There we go. In a variable called the fetch URL. Great. So, and what we are going to use is the simple fetch function. The simple fetch function, I will define that here. I will use it in a form that I will submit the URL and will submit the options, and then what we'll get is we'll get a response. And we know that our API returns a JSON, so we'll use the And so we'll get the JSON. Oh, there's another type of JSON. There we go. And then with the JSON, what we'll do is, well, let's first just console log it. Console log, that's JSON. And we'll write the JSON. And in case there is an error, let's catch the error. And console log the error. So there we go. Okay, so that's the very basic fetch function. We're going to wrap that into a do fetch function. So we can call it, and what we'll submit there is an URL and let's say a callback function. There we go. So that's what we need. And now the only thing what we need to define is the options. And I'll just use the method. And we use get to request the data from this endpoint. Great. Okay, so that's pretty easy, and I actually can test this. Now do fetch. I'll submit the fetch URL, and well, if we've done everything right, we should get something and see something here in the console log, and there we go. So we already have our car data down here. Great. So this was easy. So what do we gonna do next? Because we want to trigger now this function. Well, you can do that periodically. You can do that when you animate a lower third in by using the state changed callback. Or what we're gonna do is we'll add a button down there. The call is button do fetch, and then we'll call this function every time when this button is clicked. So now we changed actually our composition, but this doesn't reflect directly here. So you just click this button to read the new composition changes, and now this button is here. Great. So how do we find out if this button had been pressed? Well, every time when you press the button, the timestamp updates. And so we only want to execute this function when, let's say, the timestamp of the latest button click is newer than the previous one. So how do we do that? Let's say I have another function. Let's say that's my previous button TS. So, and what we'll do there is we have a function in the global context there, which is the get button TS. So that's what I'll take. I can call this. And what this function takes as an argument is it's the payload and then the button name itself. So, and what I'll do here is I'll get the payload to as a JSON, and the button name is do button. It's do fetch. There we go. So this now gives us initializes the previous button TS. So of course we get a callback whenever the button is changed down here in the payload changed. And what I'll then do there is just copy that for this button TS. I don't need to get a second time the payload because I have it already there. There we go. And now we'll just check if the previous button TS is smaller than older than this one, then we'll just update this, and once we have that done, we'll just call our fetch function with the fetch URL. And this, we're going to delete this. So now let's have a look. Whenever we click this button, we get new data. Perfect, great.
So you're in there, you just request, once that button has been clicked again, you're requesting that URL again from that specific data source. Okay. Yeah,
actually, I think there's something wrong. Okay. This, of course, is not a constant. It's because we change that every time. This can be a constant because it's initialized every time when the listener is called. So now let's see, there we go. Now we get the right JSON down there. And that's what we want. So as a second step, because we want to update, let's say we add let's have another look. What data do we have? There is the make and the model. So we'll show that in the title. We also show that here in the lower text. And then we'll take the car options and show it in the side panel. Okay, so it's the make and the model and the just make and the model and the car options. Great. So, and what we'll define is we'll define that here in the callback function directly in here. So, and that's now actually pretty easy. I just copy and paste this down there. Don't need that. And then we'll define that this is the make, I think make and model. Is that right? Make and model, and then we have the car options there. And the car options actually is an array. So what we'll do there is we'll join the elements of the array and add a new line. So what we'll see then is one car option in every line. So there we go. So now,
really quick, Thomas, you told me to let you know about time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll see.
Might be a little late for that, but
yeah. So I'll speed up. The callback, that's what we now just use here. So we don't want to lock it. We actually want to call our function. There we go. Now when I click this, let's have a look. What we did. Did we forget something? And click here. So it shows, okay, there is the trim. Virtual callback JSON. So there is what actually option. This is that's the JSON data. So we'll get this. Okay. Stupid me. So we use this make and the model twice. And actually, that's a good example also where adding some error checking in here would help you a lot. And this is what I suggest. In our case, what we'll do is we'll take from the JSON data the lower text. So I forgot also to replace that and use the make and model because the car doesn't have a lower text, which is clear. So now when I just click the button, every time I click it, we'll get new data from the API. Great. So this was the second part. Let's now quick jump into the third one. Let me close all that. So in the next part, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at singular data streams. What are singular data streams, and how do they actually work? So singular data streams are a shortcut to send data from your data service to the singular outputs. The standard way is using the REST API, because it uses the web to communicate with the singular cloud, and then further uses the web to communicate to the output. With the singular data stream, you still have a short distance through the web, but then from the singular data stream ingest server, we establish a direct WebSocket connection to the outputs, and that's very fast, and it can take updates 5 times, 10 times per second, or even more. So in the near future, you will be able to connect your data service directly to the singular data stream socket and send data there, which is then the fastest way to push data into the singular cloud. So singular data streams. First, we need to define one. And you do that in the singular data stream manager. So we'll just add a new one, and we'll say that's my data stream. There we go. So the data stream has a private and the public token. Use the private token to push data into the singular data stream, and the public token to read that. By double-clicking here on the ID, you'll see the latest update and the current payload of the data stream. So now there is actually nothing. What
do you want to speak really quickly on that one connection active note right there?
Thanks for pointing out that.
Sure.
One connection active means that there is one endpoint, one client connected to this data stream, and that's at the moment, myself with
the window,
the data stream window itself. So with last time we've shared Postman collection with REST commands, and we've extended that so you can download it again. And this updates include the command about data streams and how to define that. So I'll use that. I'm
gonna drop that link into here.
Actually, what I do is I'll just load the Postman collection, which is here. Now I have a command there. I need to update the private token. So, and that is the private token. Now let me reopen it. And when I send data, we'll see that the data update, whatever I sent here from Postman, we'll see the content updating here. Okay, this is of course a wrong payload. So now we added some dots. So what we are going to use here, what we thought is what data source do we use? And actually, what we use is we use a data source that returns the current position of the ISS. So whenever we query that, we'll get the data source. And in addition, what we use is we use a Postman feature to cycle through these two commands. One is querying the data with a simple script in there, which then sends the response as an input, as a request body to the data stream command. And I can cycle that, can run this both commands in that collection. Can define run it 10 times, and I can add the delay, which is let's say 500 milliseconds. So be careful because that's milliseconds and not seconds. And then I'll just run this, and now it's running both commands and updating the data in my data stream. So that's what we are going to use. So let me move that beside.
So this is the location of the International Space Station.
That's the current location of the International Space Station.
Changes constantly.
Yeah. Again, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the going to add a new subcomposition for that position. And this subcomposition has a field for the longitude, for the latitude, and well, when it had been refreshed the last time. So there we go. Let me open the composition script editor. And I don't need this one. I'll probably just grab a copy of the side panel, and we'll do everything then here within the subcomposition script of the ISS position. So let's have another look quick here at the command collection. What I've added there is a snippet that explains how you can access a data stream within the composition script. So I copy that and just paste it here. So just make it a little bit nicer. And what I call that, I want to call that data. There we go. So what this create data stream utility function does, it needs the public data stream token. And we'll grab that from here. And I'll just copy it here. There we go. And we are already ready to go. So let's open the Chrome debugger and see what happens. Let me save it again. And we better can follow it. There we go. So there is the "we have received" command text. So when we search for that, then there is a "we have received connecting." So that's from our callback function. So we have received open and now connect. And now the data stream is connected. And the first thing we actually receive data is when the status is set to a message. And then there is the payload. And within the payload, we'll see the position. So what do we do there? That's now actually pretty simple. So we'll just say and make sure that if the status is message, then we'll receive valid data and we'll update our composition. Instead of typing the code, as I'm loading a revision, and well, I've already have this script edit. So there we go. Let me open the composition script editor. And we look here at that code. So there is our function that opens the data stream, and we need to make sure that we use the right public token, because this might be a public token which doesn't exist anymore. And we only update the widget properties when we received a message. And up there, well, I'm using the context global get widget functions to get the widget objects. And there is a short function just to format the time so that it runs properly. Now, again, when I just go back to my composition or to my command collection, and when I run the commands, so we'll see the ISS position data coming in and updating as we've expected. Great. So now this is number 3. I will do a quick one and take a bit of a shortcut to reading and accessing widget messages.
This is part 4, right?
That's part 4.
Okay, this is the concluding part.
So what did we do there? Also, just keeping in mind what we've done the last time, and we share this the Google Sheet that we are going to use with you. So within the last webinar, we've built a Google Sheet to send data to Singular, and we've created this sheet that uses the import function to read RSS feeds from various sources.
And just, sorry, just really quick, so you guys know, you don't have to try and save all of these links I'm sending now. They're going to be linked in the template that we're going to show you at the end that you can download that has all the work Thomas has done, as well as the replay, the YouTube replay video. So we'll make sure to list all these resources for you. Okay. So the import feeds function, and the nice thing about this Google Sheet is that it updates the feeds every minute, even if you have closed it. So what we'll use here is we'll use a new version of a new variant of the Google Sheet widget. And let me add the group and call this Google Sheet Connector. And I'll add the Google Sheet widget at the root. There we go. And that's the Google Sheet widgets which you all have access to. I'm switching it to a development version. The development version, what it does, it uses a cloud cache for your data, which means when you have multiple instances of the Google Sheet widget in your composition that access the same range of the Google Sheet, they share at the end data, and this cloud cache is reducing the number of calls towards the Google API. So you shouldn't run into the Google API limits that fast anymore. So what we'll do is, and we're going to release that soon, right? In the next week or so.
Yeah, we will release it within the next week or so. At the moment, well, you can switch to the development version if you want to test that. So I take the ID and just copy it here. There we go. And then we'll take the range. It's the name of the sheet, and it's B6 to F16. So that's then B6 to F16. And we need an API key. So therefore, you find your API key, if you don't already have it, in your Google Cloud console with credentials. There you can create new API keys. And there's one thing I want to point out. With the new version of the Google Sheet widget, you have to set the application restrictions to none. You may have added referrers websites before, like app.singular.live or beta.singular.live. Now, because we're using a cloud cache, you need just to switch it off. But still, of course, keep the API key active only for a single API. So if we've created that for this webinar, I will remove it then a couple of days after the webinar. So I copy this, and now already when I just click the edit button, I will see data coming in. That's all what we need. We don't add any elements to the composition. That's not required at this stage. Sorry.
So it's just for pulling in that data. You don't have to build any widget elements inside of that sheet.
And what we activate is we enable this automatic fetch request now every 10 seconds. So let's go into our Google Sheet, our composition script editor. There we go. So, and have a look at actually at the browser console. So what do we see there? We kept this message listener right there for the beginning. And what we see there is that now this message listener is triggered every 10 seconds. And when we click there, you see it's a custom event, and the parameters that we have here, they specify the source, and it's from the Google Sheets widget. And when we look at the data, we'll see there is a table JSON that includes all the JSON data, all the from our Google Sheet. So, and again, what I'll do is I'll take here a quick shortcut and load the revision where we've added the script parts and the script components already for the Google Sheet widget, and we'll step through them right now. So it's actually pretty easy because if we just extend it here, this listener with a single line, and we make sure here that we only send data, in this case, to the flipper when the event is a custom one, and when the data are sent from the Google Sheets widget itself. And then we'll take the table JSON and send it to the update content function of the lower flipper. Let's have a look at that, because there is already a lot of things happen. So what this function has is it first receives the table JSON. But then what we do is we will copy this table into a variable where we have all the playout messages there. And then there is an interval running that always takes the first element of this table and then takes the title and the message, and we send the title to the lower title widget and the summary, which is actually this one here. So that's the summary and that's the title, to the lower flipper, which is the lower line. And well, with that, we basically have a composition that's doing quite a lot. We'll fetch data from an external API, which is this random API. We get our car data. We'll have we need the public token again for our ISS position data.
That's because you loaded a revision, right? So
yeah, because I loaded a revision that has different data there. But as soon as I copied the proper data stream token, so we'll get updates there. And we have we read our messages from the Google Sheet widget and well, deploy it through the lower flipper function. The only thing
really quick, can we just review why the flipper is behaving that way? It's because it's their update animations. I just want to refresh people on that in case.
The flipper has these two widgets, and we defined for each of these two widgets update animation. So the title, it's just sliding down when new data coming in, and the flipper, it's the out animation is down and it's animating in from the right. So when I change it, we'll see the update animation here in the composer. And because we just update the messages every 5 seconds, we'll see this animation right away. So this basically concludes our webinar part number 3. And the only thing I want to show you what's left is where can you find and download the composition. And you'll do that within the template library. Go to resources and click on webinars. And that's where you find the final version of this composition and links to connect it to the Google Sheet, to download the Postman collection for the webinar, and links where you find details about the random data API and the ISS location data API. So, Catherine, now, well, I'll hand over the microphone to you for a quick sum up.
Okay, thanks for that. That was a lot of different methods to work with the composition script to funnel data into your graphics. I just posted the link to that template, to this part 3 template for you guys to download. As Thomas mentioned, all of those relevant links are inside, or resource links are inside of that description. We will do the same thing in terms of posting these links in the YouTube replay that we post potentially tomorrow or early next week. So, and we will let you all know when that is live. So thank you for joining, those of you who stuck it out. It's a lot, but it's hard to do this type of thing in a short span of time. And I think Thomas did a great job. So we appreciate
thanks for joining the webinars, and also thanks for the tremendous feedback we already got. So when you have any questions, please drop us a line, submit the support ticket, and well, send us your suggestions, what you're interested to cover in, well, kind of this webinars or any other webinar that we are coming up with. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.